The husky pressed against the baby boy and wouldn't move. They thought it was affection. It was the most important alarm in that house, and it had no batteries to replace. Thomas and Greta Nielsen had lived in the same house for 4 years. A narrow 2-story in a suburb outside of Minneapolis. Original furnace in the basement. Original flue. Things that old houses have. Things that people who live in old houses stop thinking about. Their Siberian Husky, Loki, was 2 years old and had the kind of personality that people describe as expressive, vocal, dramatic, attentive to everyone in the room. He was not a calm dog. He was not the kind of dog that sat still against anyone for long. On a Sunday morning in November, he became that dog. Their son, Eric, was 7 months old. He was lying on a soft play mat in the living room, not unhappy, not distressed, examining his own hands with the focused intensity of an infant who has recently discovered that hands exist and finds this extraordinary. Loki lay down beside him. That was not unusual. What was unusual was that he stayed, not beside the mat, against Eric. His long flank pressed to the baby's side, his head turned toward the room, his eyes moving between the windows and the doorway, and then back to Eric. Greta noticed from the kitchen. She told Thomas. They both watched for a few minutes and smiled at it. "He's being protective," Thomas said. "That's what that is." They left them to it and went back to their morning. 40 minutes later, Loki was still there. Same position, same vigilance directed outward, same deliberate contact with the baby. Greta came back to check. She found herself feeling something she could not name, not concern exactly, just a strangeness in the picture. Loki had never been a contact dog. He played. He ran. He pressed himself against the back of the sofa when he slept. He did not position himself against a person and stay there for 40 minutes watching the room. She said his name. He looked at her and turned back to the doorway. Thomas came in and saw it too. He looked for the CO monitor on the wall near the kitchen, the small green light that blinked every 40 seconds. It was not blinking. He crossed the room. He pressed the test button. Nothing. He looked at the back of the unit. The battery compartment was open. He had replaced the battery 3 months earlier and had written a reminder on the refrigerator to do it again. He had not done it again. He replaced the battery. The unit made the sound it makes when it powers up. Then it made a different sound. He said Greta's name in a tone she had never heard before. "If you stay for stories about what animals sense before we do, you're in the right place. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one." The CO alarm was reading at 58 parts per million. The threshold for action is 35 parts per million for sustained exposure in a home with an infant. Above 70, symptoms begin. Above 150, dangerous within an hour. 58 is the number where a 7-month-old, lying on a floor for 40+ minutes with his face 6 inches above carpet level, is absorbing more than the adults, standing at counter height. They took Eric outside. They called the fire department. They opened every window on the ground floor. The furnace technician who came that afternoon found a crack in the heat exchanger. Not large, not dramatic. A fracture that had been developing through ordinary seasonal cycling and that was now venting combustion gases into the living space at exactly the level where a baby on a playmat would encounter the highest concentration. He said, "This is a common failure point in furnaces this age. What you're looking at is a slow leak that has probably been building for 2 to 3 weeks." He looked at the CO reading Tomas had photographed. At the infant's breathing height on that floor, that number was higher. Loki had been lying at that level too. He said it carefully. Dogs are more sensitive to carbon monoxide than humans. Your dog would have felt the effects of this before you did. Has your dog ever done something that made no sense until it was the only thing that made sense? Tell us in the comments. These stories deserve to be heard. Loki had positioned himself against Eric's side and stayed there. He had pressed his body against the smallest, lowest, most vulnerable person in the room, and he had not moved for 40 minutes, and his eyes had been on the doorway the entire time. And nobody had understood what they were watching. Not protective, not affectionate, grounding, keeping the baby's face from the floor, keeping himself between the gas and the child. The furnace was replaced that week. The CO monitor now has fresh batteries. Greta changes them on the 1st of every month. She sets a reminder on her phone, and she does not ignore it. Loki has a second mat now, in the living room, at floor level, where he sleeps most evenings. Every guardian deserves to be recognized, even the ones who never asked for anything in return. If stories like this matter to you, subscribe so you never miss the next one. He doesn't press himself against Eric anymore. Eric is old enough now to crawl to Loki on his own, and he does it every morning. And Loki allows it with a kind of patience that does not need to be performed. The CO reading was 58. The battery had been dead for an unknown number of days. The crack in the heat exchanger had been building for weeks. Loki had been the only working alarm in that house on a Sunday morning in November, and he had known exactly where to put himself. Next time, a family moved into a new house with their infant daughter. The dog refused to enter one room from the first day. What they found inside that room 6 weeks later is something no one had thought to check before they signed the lease.